Hello, everyone. This is Leslie Powers, and I am so excited to be here today. I am going to be talking about trauma, not the most feel-good topic, and yet it's vital for our understanding as a species. And this is for you. This is for you to look at yourself and to see your own patterns of unhealed trauma in your own life and to understand the importance of healing our trauma to not only our individual well-being, but to the well-being of our society and to the future of our humanity. So let's get started here. The title of my presentation is Release from Trauma. Who am I? I am a clinical social worker. I've been living in California since 2001. And I am originally from upstate New York. Currently, I'm providing mental health counseling to primarily adults and helping people overcome their trauma. I have experience in a lot of diverse settings and have worked in a lot of nonprofit organizations. My goal is to create sustainable healing with therapeutic knowledge. The intention of this presentation is to educate and inspire you on your individual journey towards healing and optimal mental functioning, to inspire you to become more compassionate and effective in your relationships with others, and increase your insight into the epidemic nature of trauma worldwide and its effects on our loss of freedom, and to consider how trauma itself can and is being used against us, ultimately disabling people from invoking true self-protection. A quote by Robert Scare, MD, the author of The Body Bears the Burden, Trauma, Dissociation, and Disease. Unfortunately for our species, our cages are often cultural and of our own making. Ask yourself, how deep are you willing to go for your own healing? Because the deeper you go, the more healing you will receive, and the greater the quality of life you will experience. Regardless of what happened to you as a child or to you throughout your life, it is your personal responsibility to initiate healing for yourself and to make the lifestyle changes that are required for that healing. True freedom and successful community building will not occur until people do their inner work. I'm convinced that the epidemic of trauma in our world is a major block to our coming together in unity to solve the problems that we face. We must all work on healing our trauma to maximize the effectiveness of our efforts for freedom. This will involve not only resolving past traumas, but also developing knowledge about how our mental, physical, and energetic bodies work, and then developing sustainable practices that keep us free. So what is trauma? The word trauma comes from the Greek word meaning a wound, a hurt, defeat, an alteration of the word trauma, akin to the Greek tetroskine, or to wound, tetranine, to pierce. In 1894, it was officially recognized that there can be psychic wounds, where trauma can include unpleasant experiences which cause abnormal stress. According to the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, or SAMHSA, trauma is an emotional or physical response to one or more physically harmful or life-threatening events or circumstances with lasting adverse effects on your mental and physical well-being. This could be an event you've personally experienced, witnessed happening to someone else, heard about happening to a close loved one, or heard about through your job, such as first responders, social workers, or therapists. PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, as defined in the diagnostic and treatment manual that most clinicians and doctors will use when providing state-approved treatment, defines PTSD as exposure to traumatic events such as actual or threatened death, serious injury, or sexual violence that results in a composite of symptoms arranged in 4 categories. And you need to meet a certain number of criteria in each category. The categories include intrusion symptoms, which would be intrusive thoughts, memory flashes, nightmares. The second would be avoidance behaviors, where you avoid going out in facing certain places, people, or things because they're triggering. Changes in cognition and mood, such as depression, anxiety, panic attacks, numbness of emotion, or physical reactivity. So an uncontrollable physiological response to situations or triggers that you may or may not even recognize. This is where panic attacks come in. This could also be physical symptoms such as like automatic releasing of your bowels or digestive problems. The simplest way of defining trauma is that it's an experience we have that overwhelms our capacity to cope. This is my preferred definition from Dan Siegel, MD, author of Healing Trauma, Attachment, Mind, Body, and Brain. So again, the simplest way of defining trauma is that it's an experience we have that overwhelms our capacity to cope. So if you think about this, each of our capacity to cope will be different. It will be different based on our unique individual life circumstances, our own genetic predispositions, how much fortitude we are feeling on any particular day in our mind, body, and spirit. Our capacity to cope will change day to day within our individual self. I call this the slow wear down. Cumulative injuries, incessant stressors, chronic exposure to toxins, repeated discouragements, and accumulative unprocessed emotions create wear and tear of our systems and create traumatization of our system. This is not well represented in the treatment diagnostic manuals. And I'll share this a little bit about when you go to get counseling from a provider who's billing insurance, or you are getting treatment from any kind of government insurance, there's auditing that happens, and there's a certain expectation that you are meeting a criteria of functional impairment, that the problems in your life have taken a toll to the point where you're not functioning optimally, and that we would be able to define and witness those wear downs. And then that would then justify your getting the service. It's really more about problem repair. Once a problem occurs, then you have symptoms, and then you treat the individual to eliminate those symptoms. When the symptoms are gone, a lot of insurances won't even justify paying for further treatment. So it's tricky. It can be tricky. It's not a wellness model. So here's an excerpt from an article called Understanding Our Trauma, What is Emotional Trauma by Catherine Hale out of the UK. Stress. Along with our personal experiences, we collectively live in a stressful world. We work increasingly long hours, take few holidays, lack the support of a wider community, and accumulate environmental stresses through absorbing toxins in the air we breathe and the food that we eat. Our immune systems are compromised, and our endocrine or hormonal systems are pumping out high levels of adrenaline and cortisol, stress hormones, on a daily basis just to keep us functioning. All these constant stresses are traumatic. They are against health. They are against life at its most fundamental level. I concur with this statement. Let's explore some basic aspects of our physiological survival system. It helps to consider the triune brain model, the three-parted brain, which is related to our nervous system responses to stress. We have the lizard or reptilian brain, which is including the brainstem and cerebellum. This is where we are activated into fight or flight or go on autopilot. When we are stressed and we have to react pretty unconsciously, our body will automatically create the conditions where we can optimally fight or flight. The mammal brain or animal brain is also called the limbic system. Here, this area is in charge of emotions, emotional memory, habits, attachments. The amygdala is like the fire alarm in the limbic system that when it senses danger, strikes the bell of alarm and activates the brainstem to pump out adrenaline and so forth so that we can effectively protect ourselves. And then the third part is the human brain, or neocortex. This part of the brain is in charge of abstract reasoning, communication, language, imagination, consciousness, reasoning, and rational thought, rationalizing. This particular model comes from Paul D. MacLean's The Triune Brain. Basically, these are the parts of the brain in charge of thinking, feeling, and surviving. A more complex representation of this includes its impact on the nervous system, where we have a sympathetic nervous system and a parasympathetic nervous system. Our parasympathetic nervous system is operating two aspects, the rest and digest or social engagement aspects, where we are calm, where we are settled, feeling grounded. There's a sense of safety, connection. We're oriented to our environment, oriented to ourself. There's a sense of curiosity and openness, compassion, and mindful presence. This is a very healthy place to be. Our digestive system will be working well. Our immune system is working optimally here. We are in a state of health and vitality, relaxed facial expressions, able to enjoy our sexual capacities to their max, and we can relate and connect to people. We aim for this to be our baseline. But what happens in this world of constant stressors is that our nervous system becomes reactive and attempts to adapt to the stress. And the intent in optimal situations, as we respond in a way that's meant to increase our survival and then to relax back down to this parasympathetic social engagement, ventral vagal safety. But what often happens is we don't get a break. We don't get a break, and we stay in this fluctuation between the fight or flight and the freeze response. So here we are, we're enjoying life, we have a stressor. We end up facing difficult feelings, frustration, irritation, anger, rage. Here we may be able to just manage the situation, right, at this level, and then return back down to social engagement. But if we are not able to get proper resolution and this state of stress sustains, then we can escalate further into out of the sympathetic nervous system into the parasympathetic nervous system, the dorsal vagal complex, where we go into a freeze state. And in this state is where we start to feel helpless, have a raised pain threshold, depression and numbness and dissociation can occur. Here we have collapse, immobility, and this can also lead to shame, shutdown, hopelessness, and feeling trapped. There's an immobilization here where fear shuts us down. And what can happen optimally here is, if allowed enough time to recover, and or if one receives, support, let's say support and connection from other people, that can help us to move down, to become deactivated, where the fear dissipates and we're back down to our baseline. Now, if we don't get a break and we don't have the skills or the nervous system capacity to self-soothe, then often we stay in this fluctuated pattern between the hyper and the hypo-aroused nervous system, where we are up and down with an ongoing activated fear response. And this, as you can imagine, when we're stuck on this cycle, is very hard on our bodies. It's continually pumping your heart rate up, your blood pressure up, your body temperature, your muscle tone, your breathing is affected, Your social behavior is going to be affected. Your immune system will be affected. So this is a hard pattern to sustain physiologically. To understand your nervous system in more depth, please look into the works of Stephen Borges. He is the one of the lead pioneers of the polyvagal theory. Peter Levine, who talks about somatic experiencing, has some great programs out there. And Irene Lyon, who I really love and appreciate. She's an expert on nervous system restoration. You can find her online at irenelyon.com, or she has a YouTube channel, Irene Lyon, as well. And there's this concept, neuroplasticity, which is really key to our healing. When we understand the nervous system in its complexity, we can understand how to heal it in a proper order for sustained healing. And that is getting us to the root of healing. Now, Stephen Borges, again, was the pioneer of the polyvagal system. It's a very key aspect of our nervous system to understand in terms of our healing capacities. So the polyvagal system is part of our parasympathetic nervous system, which controls our slowing down functions and social engagement system, the rest and digest, and the social connection system of how we engage socially as part of our nervous system regulation. And this is what gets disrupted in early childhood. It helps us with self-soothing, social engagement, and communication. Understanding this complex system gives us insight into repair and recovery. A keynote book by Stephen Borges should be a P. Borges, Neurophysiological Foundation of Emotional Attachment, Communication, Self-Regulation. Fancy. One can observe through their own body attunement that stress affects our guts. Here's a quote by Jessica McGuire from Repairing the Nervous System. One of the vagus nerve's many functions is to stimulate contractions and to move food through your digestive system. Chronic and traumatic stress can inhibit the vagus nerve, and this changes gut motility. These changes can lead to spasms, pain, bloating, and cramping. Pain and sensations may cause more anxiety and nervous system dysregulation, or they may lead to dissociation from the body. This is important to understand. And as I've noticed, there is a real epidemic of gut problems happening today with IBS and Crohn's and leaky gut and celiac. Our guts are wreaking havoc from our lifestyle today. Not only is our gut affected by the toxins in our environment, but also in the level of stress that we're living in. So I'm going to go into some more detail here, highlighting the work of Irene Lyon, nervous system expert and somatic practitioner. Kind of been really into her work lately and want to promote it. And she's very strong on education around the nervous system. So what defines an early trauma or adverse experience from her perspective? The experience of trauma is not restricted to stereotypically horrific abuses incurred in war, or in a home with chronic physical or sexual abuse, or even in a home with chronic emotional, mental abuse and direct parental abandonment. There are also insidious and tricky to pinpoint toxic stressors that put a person into a trauma response, leaving them unwell to the point of complex post-traumatic stress disorders, or PTSD. Early adversity, childhood trauma, and its strong connection with chronic illnesses of the physical and mental variety is what Irene Lyon calls the real infection. Cortisol, when secreted excessively, wreaks havoc on the body's cells and organs. It weakens the immune system, promotes inflammation, and is toxic to the brain. The storing up of emotions and sensations is part of the root issue. These survival energies create massive backup in the human nervous system, and from this, disease and illness can grow. And time does not heal these wounds. Time is not enough without intervention. The body keeps them even until we die if we don't actively work to release them. So consider this implication and look at yourself and what are the tolls that you are taking because of unresolved trauma. Here are some common situations that can create PTSD symptoms and are just as severe as what a soldier might experience after returning from combat. Highly stressful birth experiences, premature birth, especially where the baby is held in isolation or in an incubator, early surgical procedures and or being hospitalized and pinned down for treatment. Think of circumcision. Parents who are not well and not able to provide the appropriate care for a growing infant and child. Lack of safety in the home, abuse and neglect of all kinds, not enough food, inadequate shelter, being left alone for long periods of time, chronic suppression of emotions, and the classic children should be seen and not heard motto. Letting babies cry it out. High expectations placed upon a child such as they feel ashamed for their lack of ability or for their ability. School bullying, being ridiculed, being isolated, being separated. Parental mental illness clearly has an impact on a child's well-being. Parental abandonment. The depression of a primary caregiver can have a very deleterious impact on an infant. Frequent changes of a caregiver. Hospitalization of a parent, long separations from a child, witnessing domestic violence, being in a home where there's yelling all the time, bitter custody battles, very hard on children. Of course, the death of a parent, the death of a sibling, frequent moves, being uprooted from a safe community, from their friends, and becoming removed from parents unnecessarily, even being whisked off to daycares and preschools and regular day schools is, I think, an undue stress on children, taking them away from their secure ground if their home is secure. And many children's homes are not secure ground. So there are many common and seemingly quote unquote normal family situations that put great stress on babies and children. I think our lifestyle of just overactivity is a problem that creates this backup of unhealed traumas, a backup of unresolved emotional experiences, just general emotion that we experience through life when we're whisking kids around from one thing to the next, having them sit down and getting, on alert, in trouble if they look out the window, and then whoops, we got to go, hurry up, get your baseball uniform, we got to go, okay, let's slam this food down, hurry up, no time to relax, got to go. A lot of families are living in this high-paced lifestyle that I think is really adding to the problem. Paul Walker, from his book Complex PTSD, From Surviving to Thriving, shares this. Just as many children acquire complex PTSD from emotional traumatizing families as from physically traumatizing ones. The trauma doesn't just come from physical abuse. The emotional environment has a huge effect, maybe even more long-term damage. Denial about the traumatic effects of childhood abandonment can seriously hamper our ability to recover. In childhood, ongoing emotional neglect typically creates overwhelming feelings of fear, shame, and emptiness. It puts the child into that freeze response, into this sort of numbness where they don't have the capacity to manage and rebound from strong emotional experiences, and it can set them up for PTSD later in life. This is what makes it complex, is starting out in their childhood and then repeating ongoing stressors and developmental traumas, and then having other kinds of traumatic events happen in adulthood. And as an adult right now, take this seriously. Are you in denial about the traumatic effects of your childhood? Have you taken on the attitude that you just keep on keeping on, that you're tough, everybody has to deal with shit, and we just keep on doing what we got to do? I think to some degree, we're all in a degree of denial and minimization of our own childhood trauma, especially the neglect. that insidious kind of neglect that often occurs in a household where your basic needs are met and your parents are doing their best, but there's still an inadequate meeting of childhood needs. So really stop being so tough and stop the denial and be willing to look, to open your eyes to these more subtle things. And it's hard. And I'll say that from my own experience. It's hard to go back and look, especially as a parent sometimes, and to see how being in my own fight or flight and survival mode led to my overlooking certain patterns of my own behavior, and how I wasn't as present for my kids emotionally as they needed me to be. And there is an effect now, and I'm processing this internally and with my children, and facing the regret and the emotional sadness of that. It is part of the process. It's important that we develop the fortitude to be able to handle the regret and the guilt. And what that involves really is to overcome toxic shame. There is an epidemic of chronic illness in our society. And this is an article titled by Irene Lyon, An Epidemic of Chronic Illness, How Stress, Trauma, and Adversity Early in Life Impacts Our Capacity to Heal. Not only does our early childhood experience affect us emotionally, it affects our physical, medical conditions. Simply put, early chronic stress sucks the life energy out of a human being. It leaves them frayed and broken with little or no reserve for wound healing, self-confidence, and vitality. Quote by Irene Lyon. She shares these other bullet points. Toxic stress is insidious. It sets up our biology for failure unless we do something about it. Time does not heal the wounds. Quick fixes will fail. A weekend retreat is not enough. There are many diseases that even the Center for Disease Control suspects originate from the barrage of fear and threat dosed out to young children and infants through abuse, early trauma, and adversity. Chronic toxic stress to a child's survival and safety is the root cause, and the chronic illnesses listed, plus many more, are the byproduct or the symptoms. This includes things like type 2 diabetes, Crohn's disease, hypertension, irritable bowel syndrome, cardiovascular disease, morbid obesity, osteoarthritis, anxiety and depression, fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue, chronic pain syndrome, addiction of all kinds, Cushing's syndrome, anorexia nervosa, osteoporosis, ulcerative colitis, and susceptibility to cancer. To just back this up is the ACE study, the Adverse Childhood Experience study done through Kaiser with over 17,000 participants surveyed. This was between 1995 and 1997. The ACE study findings suggest that certain experiences are major risk factors for the leading causes of illness and death, as well as poor quality of life in the United States. It is critical to understand how some of the worst health and social problems in our nation can arise as a consequence of adverse childhood experiences. And realizing these connections can assist us in helping people towards prevention and recovery. And again, from Irene Lyon, we no longer have the supportive tribal communities that our genetics were designed for. Our systems are confused and overwhelmed. This is a very pivotal conclusion. It highlights the importance of families and communities for our wellness, mentally, emotionally, and physically. We are not hardwired to soothe. As infants, we are not hardwired to self-soothe. Many of us were not equipped with adequate healthy role modeling of emotional regulation, nor did we fully develop self-soothing abilities. When a baby does not get the right kind of coaching from their caregiver on how to come down and out of this fight or flight survival response, the biological survival default is to freeze. the shutdown response happens because at this fragile age, the infant cannot voice their frustration with words and tell the parent what's going on, nor can they flee the scene, hit, or kick. And this lack of coaching often extends throughout children's lives, where children feel very alone and isolated and unseen. Their physiology, though, saves them from feeling all the terrible distress. But this freezing also ingrains a deep pattern in the nervous system that the best thing to do in times of stress is to shut down. This is the epitome of helplessness, of learned helplessness. And it's an internal experience that isn't necessarily backed in reality. And when a child doesn't get the opportunity to learn how to self-soothe and doesn't get that responsive adult soothing in their life, this pattern of hopelessness and helplessness remains the template that they live their lives through as adults. And so you can look at your own life and you can see, where do you hold on to patterns of frozen emotion, of feeling a bit powerless, helpless? Where have you given up? Where do you feel alone? Look at the ways that you approach and withdraw in relationships in your life. What are these approach-withdraw patterns? As children, and even as adults, we're really seeking attunement, connection, and safety in relationships. This means to be seen for who we are as we are in this particular moment, to be seen and attuned to. This is a vibration. To be soothed, to be connected to be held, to be reassured, to be physiologically grounded so that we can feel safe in the here and now. These are foundational emotional needs for every human being. And when the caregiving provides inconsistency or lacks in providing the security we need, then this can disrupt our emotional attachment in adulthood and lead to chaos and confusing interactions in our relationships. There are 4 basic attachment styles in adults. The secure attachment involves feeling that we can trust easily, that we are attuned to our emotions, that we can attune to others. We're not afraid of our emotions. We can communicate what we feel. We can communicate when we're upset. We can communicate our needs. We know our needs. And it leads to cooperative and flexible behavior in relationships. The anxious attachment style person has a more sensitive nervous system. They struggle with communicating their needs directly, have trouble even identifying and knowing their own needs because perhaps they're more focused on the external behaviors of the people around them. They tend to act out. You become emotional, triggered, reactive, and this can lead to more conflict, more confusing interactions with a partner. Then there's avoidance styles. There's a dismissive avoidant, where a person may downplay the importance of relationships, where they become extremely self-reliant, but yet during a crisis can become more vulnerable. And then there's the avoidant fearful type, which is when a person's more a dependent in the relationships than the dismissive avoidant, yet they very strongly fear rejection, have a lower self-esteem, low self-confidence around their relationship interactions, and high anxiety. So we can look here on the wheel from this secure corner, this quadrant here, where there's low anxiety and low avoidance. And then as anxiety increases, then we have higher anxiety and more preoccupation, low avoidance, but more obsession and more preoccupation with relational dynamics, the frequent texting, the getting upset when someone doesn't text back fast enough, the worrying about, oh my gosh, this person didn't look at me? Are they mad at me? That's the highly anxious kind of attachment style. And then with high anxiety, but also higher levels of avoidance, then we're withdrawing, more fearful, more cautious, not as emotionally present, more numb. And then you can just avoid altogether. Like, I don't need a relationship. Relationships are scary. They're dangerous. Who needs a man, right? We're just going to be superwoman, and I'm not going to be vulnerable. And all these imbalances can result from a disruption in early childhood relationship. So clearly the effects of trauma on children are severe. Trauma hijacks the mind by injuring the nervous system. It hijacks the self. It really disconnects children from their own inner wisdom, their own body wisdom, from their own confidence and how they're operating in the world, their own sense of importance and efficacy. Traumatized children feel that the world is uncertain and unpredictable. They can become socially isolated and can have difficulty relating to and empathizing with others. When you are not empathized with, when your needs aren't met, it makes it harder to build empathy and to be able to provide that reciprocal attunement to other people. That leads to a more likely outcome of narcissism and fight or flight based activity throughout life. And then the biology. Traumatized children may experience problems with movement and sensation, including hypersensitivity to physical contact and insensitivity to pain. They may exhibit unexplained physical symptoms and increased medical problems. Lots of children have disrupted sensory integration symptoms, which really makes it hard actually to be in relationship, because kids can develop hypersensitivity to touch and not be able to tolerate even being held, so that normal soothing attempts backfire in their system. So children who've been exposed to various kinds of substances in utero will be born with sensory processing disorders right out the gate that make it painful, actually, to have normal types of sensory stimulation, where a mother's attempt to soothe may put a kid into, a baby, into arching spasms of pain because it's excessive overwhelm to their sensory systems, to their nervous systems. Mood regulation. Children exposed to trauma can have difficulty regulating their emotions, as well as difficulty knowing and describing their feelings and internal states. So if we don't help children to develop these skills and repair these dysregulations, then what makes you think that when these children grow up to be adults that they magically learn how to do these things? They don't. So many adults have come into adulthood with inadequate emotional nervous system health. From Paul Walker. The most prevalent kind of CPTSD, or complex post-traumatic stress disorder, is the kind that comes from growing up in a severely abusive and/or neglectful family. Damage occurs when you suffer traumatizing abuse and abandonment. Sexual abuse is especially traumatizing. I believe that we have an epidemic of traumatizing families. 1/3 of girls and 1/5 of boys are sexually abused before they enter adulthood. Kim Foundation statistics show that 26% of Americans over 18 have been diagnosed with a mental disorder. That's more than a quarter. Damage is created not only by physical or sexual abuse, but by emotional abuse and neglect. So what are the effects of prolonged stressors and survival issues? We've already talked about health problems. relationship problems, right? Consider the effects on your time and attention. If you are struggling with emotional issues and unresolved traumas, if your nervous system is dysregulated, how relaxed are you? How well are you able to maximize your potentials? How much chaos and dysfunctional relational experiences are you having that are getting in the way of just really maximizing your life and having greatest peace of mind? So this comes back really to this hierarchy of needs that Maslow talks about. We have physiological needs at the very base. Think of a baby. The baby needs to be fed, held, rested, given warmth, proper temperature regulation, right? And if the baby's needs are not met, the physiology goes into a distress state. Same with just basic security and safety. If the environment is not safe, and this infant can sense that, and they do, their physiology is going into an overwhelmed state. They're going into fight or flight or freeze. Infants can't really fight. They can't really run away. So their system is in freeze state and they are taxed. If they are not feeling loved and they don't have a sense of belonging in a family with a responsible, consistent, and an adequate caregiver, then their system is going to go into a reactive state. Okay, and they're not going to feel self-esteem. They're not going to feel confident in themselves. They're not going to be attuned to the wisdom of their own physiology. And they'll be thwarted from activating their full potential and their full creative drive. It's simply holding a ceiling, a low ceiling that cuts off our ability to fully know ourselves, to fully expand into our full potential and find the formula to our individual template as a magi, as a magician here in this body, in this physical plane. So this chronic stress, this chronic wear and tear, stealing of our time and attention, and overload and overwhelm of the lifestyle that most of us have been living is thwarting us and blocking our full growth and our self-actualization. No doubt. Trauma creates compartmentalization and confusion in our minds, which impairs our vision and therefore our ability to discern and make accurate judgments. Our perceptions become distorted. Our sense of time is distorted. We're living in a life on repeat where our nervous system is triggered over and over in a state, putting us in a state of fight or flight or freeze on an ongoing basis. We're stuck in time. We lose the ability to clearly see and respond appropriately to the cause and effect patterns in front of our eyes. The patterns that are happening become unseeable because we're blinded by the stress of our fight or flight response and our freeze, our shutdown. We lose sight of ourselves. We lose our individuality, our individual potential. And with unresolved trauma, we're operating unconsciously. Without healing, we will keep making decisions and exercising behaviors that sabotage ourselves, that sabotage our goals, and ultimately our futures. We will keep making unconscious decisions that just fuck up or overly complicate our lives. Why do we want to keep repeating patterns of chaos and drama in our lives? Why do we keep doing it? Well, this is why: unresolved trauma, inadequate healing. So this lack of healing has negative effects on our children, our children's children, and their children. There are generational effects. And I claim that natural law, understanding natural law, can be a guide to self-knowledge, which acts as our self-defense. When we have self-knowledge and properly understand ourselves in the world, understanding our own physiology, understanding how to read the signals from our nervous system, and then understand how we relate to the environment we're in and the laws of the universe, that provides us safety and security. That is our self-defense, and provides a general guide to life itself. A life that can decrease conflict and trauma. So this is a reminder here that the child that I'm talking about resides inside you. We all have unhealed childhood wounds, and you must develop a loving relationship with that child within, with your child parts, in order to heal and be whole. You must come to a deep sense of deserving good, to enjoy the good you have. And this deserving is more than a thought or an idea or a hollow affirmation, but a deep knowing, a feeling within your physiology. And it is through feeling the safety in your physiology that we heal. Trauma survivors have symptoms, often instead of memories. And when we are in this state of symptomology, we are not in that healing, safe place in our physiology where we feel deserving of good. Instead, we are feeling things like shame and worthlessness, emotional overwhelm. We may suffer with chronic pain, headaches, depression, a loss of interest in life, a loss of interest in pleasure, self-destructive behaviors, self-harming behaviors, irritability, decreased concentration, lack of focus, a loss of a sense of future, feelings of hopelessness, having little or no memories at all, having big blank spaces in your childhood memory. You may feel hypervigilant and have a lot of mistrust in general with other people or the world. You may have physiological or emotional numbing. Substance abuse and eating disorders are symptoms. Nightmares and flashbacks, insomnia, feeling unreal or out of your body, having generalized anxiety or panic attacks, irritability. This is all related to trauma and ultimately leads to a loss of a sense of who I am. With prolonged, unresolved trauma, we lose ourselves and we forget who we are. Trauma creates a distorted sense of self. It alters our perspective of time and our perceived safety in relationships. Bessel van der Kolk, renowned trauma expert, brought this to my attention of how post-traumatic stress disorder is really a disorder of time, where events that occurred in time in our nervous system never ended, because there is a hypervigilance and a sense that it will happen again, that we are never safe. And so our nervous system, our bodies never fully relax, and because we are always on alert for the next shoe to drop. It steals our presence. It steals our ability from being in the present moment, which is where we experience that real sense of safety. When we are in the present moment, in that rest and digest, in that social engagement system where we are supported and grounded and confident in ourselves, and there's a sense of safety. Bessel van der Kolk from The Body Keeps the Score has said, being traumatized means continuing to organize your life as if the trauma were still going on, unchanged and immutable, as every new encounter or event is contaminated by the past. Being traumatized is not just an issue of being stuck in the past. It is just as much a problem of not being fully alive in the present. Well said. The energy stays stored in the system and unleashes at times, often out of nowhere, with what we call an anxiety attack, which is technically stored survival stress. The symptoms create more problems in your life and activate shame. Internalized shame is related to internal occulting or compartmentalization, hiding of experiences and feelings that were overwhelming and feel shameful. Actually befriending the panic, the anxiety, the difficult symptoms, and getting to understand them is helpful and really essential to dissolving this intense energy and metabolizing the energy that has been lodged in our nervous systems, in our bodies, literally. More trauma leads to more splitting and more compartmentalization within. Ask yourself, what lifestyle changes are you called to make in order to allow yourself recovery? From Peter Levine, he says, the symptoms of trauma can be stable, that is, ever present. They can also be unstable, meaning that they can come and go and be triggered by stress, or they can remain hidden for decades and suddenly surface. Usually, symptoms do not occur individually, but come in groups. They often remain hidden for decades and suddenly surface. They often grow increasingly complex over time, becoming less and less connected with the original trauma experience. This is where generalized anxiety develops and people become very anxious about so many things in life and don't often connect that state to their early trauma. Again, we can look at the fight, flight, freeze, and fawn responses as related to the nervous system and as related to different behavioral outcomes. Excessive fight response activated in the sympathetic nervous system is associated with narcissism. A physiological reaction that occurs in response to a perceived harmful event, attack, or threat to survival can lead one constantly in a vigilant state where they need to be protecting themselves. The excessive flight response, again, in activation of the sympathetic nervous system, can lead to obsessive compulsive behaviors, highly anxious behaviors, fearful, vigilant, afraid, repetitive, behaviors that are meant to sort of keep you sure that you're safe. You're safe if you close the door, check your lock 100 times. You're safe if you wash your hands and you put on a lot of, weird alcohol stuff on your hands, and you put on masks, and, you make sure that you don't touch the bathroom door. You get very obsessive, compulsive, anxious is coming from excessive flight response. Excessive freeze in the parasympathetic system comes from immobilization, shock. It's a freeze response preparing for death. You're helpless. This is a vagus nerve impact, and this leads to dissociative states, shutting down, helplessness. And then there's the fawn state, which results in a codependency pattern of people pleasing, is for my better interest. I will be surviving much better if I'm keeping everybody happy around me, making sure they're not mad. I don't want them to be mad at me. I want them to think good of me. I want to always do the right thing. I'm going to do it really well. We may become perfectionists, but we are going to be the best ever. We're going to take care of everything. We're going to caregive. And I am going to probably wear down my body prematurely and collapse because I'm constantly focused on everything external to myself and very disconnected from my own body and my own needs, and probably not seeing my needs as important as other people's. You can see where this goes. As I said, we're not dealing with just the effects of trauma on ourselves. There's consequences. There's consequences to our children and to future generations. Kathy O'Brien says, it only takes 3 generations of conditioning for a belief to become autogenically ingrained. Intergenerational consequences of the Holocaust on offspring's mental health. This is a study that focused on parental mental health problems, perceived parenting and attachment quality, family structure, additional stress and life events, and psychophysiological processes. Various parent and child characteristics and their interaction were found to contribute to the development of psychological symptoms and biological and epigenetic variations in their offspring. Holocaust survivor offspring show a heightened vulnerability for stress in the face of actual danger. The results also indicate intergenerational effects on offspring cortisol levels. So right out of the gate from birth, increased cortisol levels, increases susceptibility to detrimental effects from stress, a bit of a more vulnerable physiology. Trauma leads to biological changes, which can create chemical changes passed on in the DNA. And behavioral changes can lead to behavioral impacts that are passed on to subsequent generations as well. Self-harm tendencies, addiction, attachment implications, suicide risks, heart and liver disease, and cancer. Repeated and multiple assaults on the mind and body accumulate in their effects to create disease multi-generationally. This is another study that just reinforces that conclusion. The legacy of trauma. An emerging line of research is exploring how historical and cultural traumas affect survivors' children for generations to come, including risky health behaviors, anxiety and shame, food hoarding, overeating, authoritarian parenting styles, high emotional neediness on the parts of parents, and low community trust and cohesiveness that many describe as living in survival mode. That's the stress state. That is the trauma state. Each generation seemed to kind of learn from the previous one, with survivors telling children, don't trust others, don't trust the world. Trauma psychologist Elena Sharapanov, PhD of Cambridge College in Boston, quotes, living under such difficult, oppressive circumstances can lead parents to formulate fear-based survival messages that they pass on to their children and grandchildren with ideas such as don't ask for help, it's dangerous. Still another transmission vehicle is the body itself. The researchers posit that a potential transmission vehicle for these effects is epigenetics, environmentally driven molecular processes that can turn genes on or off. Ironically and sadly, trauma turns us away from that which we need the most: united families and communities. Healthy families and communities are vital for our healing and for the healing of future generations. So here we are. Here we are, having laid the framework of understanding about our physiology somewhat in its very beginning stages of understanding. And now we're ready to set the stage for your personal healing journey and what this will take. This is your time now to reflect and to ask yourself, are you in a safe place to heal? Or are you actively being traumatized? If so, start by working on extricating yourself from the traumatic environments, from the people, places, and things, from the processes and patterns that are perpetuating your stress state and not allowing you to heal. Look at your relationship with time. Ask yourself, what are your excuses about not having enough time? Not having enough time for self-care, not having enough time to do your shadow work. How do you resist making time for yourself? It's time to make a commitment, and a commitment to yourself involves making space and giving yourself time to do the work. We seek to find freedom within ourselves so that we have freedom in the world outside. We need to recognize that perceived distress often is a reaction to a trigger, perhaps yet to be identified, and that it is likely related to your childhood past. Where do you feel distress? Where do you get triggered? Be open to the possibility that that current trigger is tied to a string that goes back deep in your past, in your physiology, to a wound where it's still stuck, still unresolved, and still having a hold on you, leading to reactivity, sometimes years later in your current life. We want to connect that distress to its roots in your traumatic past by rewinding back in time into your childhood history and noticing where the feelings and body sensations were similar. What feels familiar here? What time in your life do they remind you of? Identify the internalized old belief systems, the belief about yourself, the belief about the world, about what is true or not true, that developed as a result of that traumatic experience. Remember that these traumas could be small, being teased in school. It doesn't have to be some major physical abuse, for example. Challenge the old beliefs and begin replacing them with new core beliefs that better fit the truth about you in your life today. This is a fairly cognitive approach. It also involves really attuning to the feeling states in your bodies, because your emotional state and the path of rewinding and remembering is generally a physiological one. So here are the general stages of trauma recovery. First, we need to establish safety and stabilization. And this is within our own systems, to feel safe inside ourselves and to learn how to stabilize this volatile emotional state of flux. Our goal is to overcome dysregulation. And then we want to process and desensitize the traumatic memories that are still alive and wreaking havoc. And then we integrate and move on. In order for us to be safe, to look within and claim and find experienced safety within our bodies, we have to be safe in our external world. And that's why it's very important that we leave abusive relationships and abusive and chronically traumatic and stressful life-stealing environments, jobs, associations, etc. Because as long as we're in the present state of our lives being bombarded and having to manage and negotiate our stress, it's really creating a block, a barrier to us getting to the deeper memories to heal. And we're just like treading water. I'll share here that I have been influenced and have borrowed some of the material from Janina Fisher, PhD, in her Psychological Aids for Working with Psychological Trauma, 10th edition, copyright 2011, a really good aid for therapists to share educational material with their clients. Ask yourself now, what would it take to slow down your life? To take a break from the go, go, go and look within? Are you willing to commit time to your own healing and integration work? When can you fit it in? Does this mean that you wake up earlier in the morning and do some meditation and journaling and make sure that you give yourself a slow period of time without external stimulation to look within, to do body scans and mindful self-awareness? Does this mean that throughout your day that you commit to developing a habit of checking in with yourself? and really asking, what's my response to this experience right now? What do I need? This healing will require some slowing down. And it takes real courage to face and heal yourself, to face and heal unpleasant memories and unpleasant conclusions about your family and your childhood and your ancestry and your life, unpleasant conclusions about the state of the world today and the risks to our future. We're in a very chaotic time of history where trauma is visible in every aspect of our lives, and it can be overwhelming. It is overwhelming. So we need to develop some refuge and give ourselves what we really need, which is the opportunity to be present with ourselves at a pace that does not overwhelm us. Your healing contributes to the healing of the whole. Your transformation is a part of the transmutation needed to heal the world. So stop romanticizing working yourself into the ground, running on no sleep, and managing on a crappy diet. Take recovery time and the proper fuel to process your experiences and optimize your functioning. Reclaim yourself. Reclaim your individuality. Offer support to others when you are able, in a compassionate and loving way, from a place of your own regulated nervous system. And I will get into this more in my part 2, where I get far more in depth into the healing strategies that we need to follow through on the knowledge that I've shared in this presentation. When inward tenderness finds the secret hurt, pain itself will crack the rock, and let the soul emerge. Rumi. A word of hope from Peter Levine. I have come to the conclusion that human beings are born with an innate capacity to triumph over trauma. I believe not only that trauma is curable, but that the healing process can be a catalyst for profound awakening, a portal opening to emotional and genuine spiritual transformation. I have little doubt that as individuals, families, communities, and even nations, we have the capacity to learn how to heal and prevent much of the damage done by trauma. In so doing, we will significantly increase our ability to achieve both our individual and collective dreams. And we can do this through bringing back and valuing the hearth and home, by protecting our home and allowing attachment to nature and to the earth that we live on. A strong attachment to the place that you live results in greater satisfaction with your home and expectations of future stability in that place. These feelings transcend attachments to other people in the area and represent a genuine affection for the physical location itself, and the passage of time strengthens our attachment to the places that we live, because our physical surroundings play such an important role in creating a sense of meaning and organization in our lives. It is not surprising that our sense of the place we live is closely tied to our sense of who we are. This is from Home is Where the Heart Is, but Where is Home? From Frank McAndrew, PhD. Protecting the earth, protecting our home, is a vital part of creating a solid ground for us to walk on. And this brings us to the self-defense principle, essential for maintaining a safe world for us to live in, to prevent unnecessary trauma for future generations. This will require us to reclaim our mind. In this psychological and spiritual war, it is essential that we reclaim our minds, bodies, and relationships, and activate the tools to maintain protection of our most vital energy, of our bodies, minds, and spirits, and to value that which we've yet to express and yet to live into as our potential. Some caveats here on your journey of healing is I want you to really embrace being alive and not allow your fear states to prevent you from fully loving and maximizing the experiences that we're here to experience in life. And know that, not all stress is traumatic. It's not bad to experience stressful things. Some stress is healthy, and it is like conditioning for the nervous system, like cold plunges. Not every big behavior is rooted in a problem or trauma. Some are very appropriate. Don't overanalyze yourself. Don't analyze yourself incessantly. This will just create more stress in your system. Stop trying to fix yourself all the time. Don't over-identify with your trauma. Don't label yourself as permanently broken. Don't over-focus on negative memories or play them on repeat in your mind. Don't over-pathologize. You don't always need to be fixed. Your trauma is not an excuse for your bad behavior. So just remember those things as you move forward and embrace being alive. Know that there's a dynamic experience of fulfillment on the other side, and it's available to you. Again, we are alive to do more than just live. We are here to thrive. My website is alivethrive.life. My slogan is released from trauma, guided by principles, empowered by freedom. You can reach me at vibrantlightcounseling@gmail.com. I offer personalized coaching sessions through Zoom. I can help you overcome blocks and find more fulfillment and peace in your life. I'm happy for you to have this information, and I hope that you take this and really think about it deeply and how it relates to you, your families, and your choices. Reach out for support as needed, because there really is healing in connection. And it is the trauma that is leading us to isolation. It is healing that brings us to healthy connection. Thank you. So thanks again for listening to my presentation here at FUNL 3 and Freedom Under Natural Law, the Trivium. There's so many good presentations here. Please take the time to look at them all, and we'll be back again next year. Have a great day.